Hello and welcome. My name is Andrea Hernandez, and I'm going to be presenting on my thesis entitled Voices Unheard, Exploring the Impact of Culturally Responsive Pedagogy on English Language Learners' Perceptions of Inclusivity, Academic Growth, and Social Emotional Well-Being. I'd like to welcome the committee members. First, we have Dr. Moises Alvarado Garcia. He is my thesis chair, and Michelle Dom, who is currently the assistant principal at the school site that I am employed at. So briefly, a table of contents. We're going to start with our introduction, topic, purpose, the scope, specifically with the literature review, methods, results, recommendations, conclusion, acknowledgments, and closing remarks. So the topic that I chose really relied on two things, the student experience and pedagogy. For the student experience, I really honed in on English language learners as they are historically one of the lowest scoring demographics in the California school system. They've experienced systemic barriers that have created inaccess in their academic careers. And I wanted to really explore their perceptions on what their experience is living as an English language learner in a school system. But specifically, I wanted to explore the impact of intentional pedagogy, like culturally and linguistically inclusive pedagogy. So, as we see school systems becoming more and more diverse, it is essential and critical that educators are adapting their practices to become more inclusive and representative of the demographics that they are teaching. Um, and so, with that being said, the research question is, what are the perceptions and impacts of culturally responsive and linguistically inclusive pedagogy on English language learners in these three factors: academic performance, inclusivity, and social emotional well-being? So the purpose of this, I wanted to really explore the students' perceptions and the impacts that they feel when being taught using culturally responsive and linguistically inclusive pedagogy to see how it affects them in the three realms that I stated prior, their sense of inclusivity, academic performance, and their overall social emotional well-being. I also wanted to assess the validity and the effectiveness of the pedagogy when used with fidelity. And then finally, I wanted to give a platform for scholars who are English language learners to share their lived experiences in a high school setting. I wanted to provide educators ultimately with actionable steps that they can take to create an inclusive and a least restrictive learning environment for all scholars. So the scope. First, participants. I leveraged 5 high school immigrant students who came from Mexico over the last 4 years, and they have been going through an assimilation process. And I really honed in on their lived experiences and the perceptions assimilating in a school site in Southern California. It's also important to note that this study also chronicled how the teacher implemented these strategies in their classroom, specifically their ELD classroom. I am the researcher as well as the educator that was implementing these pedagogies in my ELD classroom. The site that this was conducted in was a public high school in Southern California, and it is important to note that the population of English language learners, according to the SARC report, is only 1.4%. This school site is a magnet school that is a high achieving school. So it is also operating on a schedule. It's a block schedule called a 4x4 schedule, which means that things are inherently done at a faster pace. And this really affects the experiences that the English language learners go through because the fast paced and the stigma that we are high achieving sometimes creates this inaccess for them to be able to keep up and also achieve academic growth. The data sources that I used, I leveraged extant data. And this included journal entries that were already in existence, reflections, and SEL surveys. Specifically, it's called the IntelliSpark survey that my administration administers to scholars 3 times throughout the school year. The time frame that this was conducted in was a 3-month time frame, and I conducted it using a qualitative approach as well as a phenomenological approach to the research as well. So the literature review, this is where basically I was able to look at the existing literature and be able to synthesize it with my own work to further create this gap and or not create a gap, to further mend this gap of what are the English language learners experiencing, what does the literature say, and how are we able to take this information and create actionable steps. First, the Geneva Gay, her work on culturally responsive teaching was definitely something that was a cornerstone, and something I referred back to multiple times as I was implementing this pedagogy. Linguistically responsive teaching, which is research conducted by Lucas and Vegas, and then culturally adapted SEL, which was done by Castro. And then through the pedagogy, I also was able to review literature that talked about different theoretical frameworks by specifically one about subtractive schooling, Valenzuela. This was conducted by Valenzuela, a researcher. And then finally, translanguaging and scaffolding and the impacts that that has on English language learners. And that was conducted by Gibbons and Conte. Uh, Moving right along. So the methods that I used for this study, the design, like I mentioned prior, it was a descriptive qualitative approach as well as a phenomenological approach. The instruments that I used was extant data. So in the ELD course, it was already a standard that journal reflections and journal entries were going to be conducted on a daily basis. And so I was able to leverage all of this data to really create this essence of what these English language learners' lived experiences truly are. And then finally, the IntelliSpark SEL survey. It's given at the beginning of the year, the middle, and at the end. And I was able to use this as a metric. It was a Likert scale. So I was able to use this as a metric to see how they have grown into themselves and fully assimilated, and perhaps to see how the impact of the pedagogy resulted in their scores. And then finally, for the analysis, I was able to use thematic coding. And through that, there was 4 prominent themes that emerged. First, it was the linguistic barrier to academic success that English language learners faced. Second was the cultural identity and belonging. Third, student voice and validation. And the fourth was relationships and responsive interventions. And so I clipped in here a chart that I created for my thesis. And you could see here several of the codes that arose from the themes. So for example, for linguistic barrier to academic success, we had language barrier, self-doubt, miscommunication, teacher disconnect, and low motivation. And if you continue to see, we have for cultural identity, we have cultural shaming, ethnic discrimination, peer judgment, social isolation, and bullying, silencing, inconsistent validation for student voice and validation, selective participation, low self-worth. And finally, for relationships and responsive interventions, we see teacher support, peer support, family support, academic accommodation, kindness, and empowerment. So these are all the codes that emerged through me reviewing and synthesizing and analyzing all of the exit data that I had from the 5 participants that I was able to leverage for this study. And so now I want to discuss the results. In order to really understand the results, you have to see where their mindset was prior to the implementation of this pedagogy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide a scope of academic performance, inclusivity, social emotional awareness, and leverage some of their responses for us to really understand where the English language learner at school site A perceived themselves to be, and after the course of the 3 months to see where they are now as a result of intentional and consistent implementation of the theoretical framework and pedagogy. So first, for academic performance, participants expressed that they felt like they were left behind. And as a result of being left behind, their confidence did take a direct hit. And at times they did not believe that they were good enough to excel academically. And now we're going to look at some of the responses and their journal entries that they shared. This scholar said, I ever felt behind in school because of my language. Many times happened this because I felt behind of not learning like others. Some of them, they already are fluent. I felt those feelings in ninth grade. That's why I was giving up on my dreams because I wasn't loving myself or I was trying to make a second face where I had to fake it. So here we see that number one, they weren't feeling comfortable in who they were. Number two, that there was a clear language barrier that was not inhibiting them to access the curriculum. They were feeling like this language barrier was stomping their growth, stunting, excuse me, their growth. Next, we have this student who shared, yes, I had felt left behind, and this happened because I didn't understand the class. For me, it was very hard and I didn't have enough time. So I did fail in everything, but I tried. But anyway, sometimes I was thinking school is not for me and I should stop going and go to Mexico and just keep working. So here we have this student who clearly did not feel championed, valued, and seen, and was now having this insecurity that I cannot excel academically. Therefore, I do not have a place here in the school system in Southern California. Moving right along, we have inclusivity. So some student sentiment shared that ELs experienced cultural shaming, peer judgment, and this directly diminished their overall sense of belonging and inclusivity as a whole. So this student shared, I feel ignored sometimes because there are some people who knows that I don't speak English. Sometimes I talk to a few people and they ignore me because they know that I'm Mexican, but I didn't care about it. But also I feel bad because I wanted to talk to some of the students or people and they just ignore me. The results, there is a clear desire to belong, a clear desire to fit in. That's why it's so important to take a step back and see that these are scholars that are in high school and are assimilating. And so they feel now their own perception is that who they are, their ethnic background, their culture is now an inhibitor to them being included into this ecosystem that is school site A. And then next, this is directly an example directly about cultural shaming. This student states, I told people my story when I was a little girl. I used to wash chickens and work at a store, and people make fun of me, make fun of that because of that. I get mad, but there's nothing I can do. I just say yes, yes. And what is the problem with it? At least my parents did show me how to work, and you don't. Life is not the same for everyone. If you had everything when you were a kid, then good for you. But for me, it wasn't. And so now what happens is that this then creates a roadblock in the scholar's head where they're like, I'm not going to share my sense of who I am. I'm not going to share my culture because it was not received well. It was not received well with positive remarks and they didn't feel included because of it. And now for social emotional well-being, the student sentiments were participants felt silenced and dismissed. Several participants displayed a clear disconnect and apathy. They believed that their voice did not hold strength compared to other scholars who were not English language learners, who were not immigrant students. And so this developed this sense of apathy within them. I think that my voice doesn't actually matter because every single time I give my opinion, nobody cares. So I just keep my opinion to myself. This does not affect me because I just keep normal and I don't have to worry about what am I going to say or what is people going to think about my opinion or what if I get it wrong and they will make fun of it. So now we see that there is not this confidence to engage at their voice. They don't feel like their voice matters at all. And now that we've discussed their prior perceptions, we can really understand the impact that this pedagogy did have. So the excellent data revealed towards the end of the 3 months that they showed growth and explicit confidence and explicit engagement with the curriculum, being able to be more present, being able to take more ownership and stake in their learning. The survey data showed that there was an increased sense of belonging and they believe that they trusted their teachers more and there was an adult on campus that they feel like they can go to after the integration of this inclusive pedagogy. Students cited that their relationships with their peers and teachers were also increased and it was also stronger because of this pedagogy. And a student shared, Since I entered in high school, I also wanted to run a leadership position, but I was scared and insecure of myself. For my junior year, I tried to run a leadership position for my senior year. I was scared, but I tried. I had the support of my friends and teacher that believe in me. None of them judge me. They support me. Now I'm a community service chair of the club called HOSA, and I'm excited at the same time, scared, nervous, because I know I will be talking in front of members, but it's okay. I take it as a challenge and part of the process to improve as an English language learner. Culturally and linguistically inclusive pedagogy champions students' ethnic diversity. It champions who they are and calls for educators to leverage that so that they can grow as a scholar and a person. Here we can clearly see that this scholar is no longer viewing their English language learner label as a deficit. They're viewing it as an asset. And the way that you do this is through including curriculum that is well thought out and thorough and is representative of who the scholars are that you are teaching. And so this scholar here clearly shows that they have an increased sense of confidence, which affects their sense of inclusivity. Their academic performance has grown infinitely because they are now secure enough in themselves to pursue a club that is a science pathway in specific. That's what HOSA is. And they are now feeling secure enough with their abilities to put themselves out there to pursue a leadership position. And in thus, their social emotional well-being is significantly increased because now they have this newfound purpose in this school ecosystem at school site A. Now they are a leader. Now they have a role. And so for my recommendations, it comes down to a couple of things. First, we need to provide professional development for general education teachers on culturally responsive teaching and linguistically responsive teaching. Now, at the high school level, it is important for each educator to know exactly what this looks like in their specific discipline. What culturally responsive teaching looks like in a science classroom is going to look different than in an English language arts classroom. And it's critical that professional development is provided in a departmentalized way so that each educator is able to access viable ways that they can insert this curriculum and this pedagogy in their day-to-day practices. With that being said, there needs to be this revamp or this embedding of culturally representative text and curriculum that is tailored specifically to English language learners, but also you could take a step back and look at your school's demographics. Let's see what demographics are underrepresented, underserved, and see how we can implement curriculum to make this bridge this gap, if you will. We need to develop a metric that measures the overall effectiveness of the pedagogy in the three realms of the research question: their academic growth, their sense of belonging, their overall social emotional well-being. And then following training, there needs to be an accountability system where educators are know that this is the standard and it will not be wavered on, and this is how you maintain this sense of inclusivity. In conclusion, culturally and linguistic pedagogy does impact English language learners in a positive way. I do know that this study did have limitations. It was a study done on 5 scholars. So we can see that there are potential positive effects as a result of the pedagogy being implemented. This study also calls for a shift in the education world to remove these systemic barriers and really step into pedagogy and theoretical frameworks that are inclusive of all students. And they affirm who they are student-centered, and they thus will result in students having a higher sense of belonging, higher academic growth, and overall a stronger social emotional awareness. When students feel valued and seen, they thrive. I want to say a couple of thank yous. First, I'd like to acknowledge and say thank you to Preston Harvey, my partner, my editor, and my greatest supporter, Gloria and Andrea Hernandez, my mom and my dad. I am not everything that I am is because of you. Dr. Moises Alvarado Garcia, thank you so much for your patience, your kindness, and your ability to help me produce my thesis. And Michelle Daw, my assistant principal, for being extremely generous and gracious and always being the first person to help me at school. And the participants for being so vulnerable and allowing me to use their voices to spread more awareness. Closing remarks, student voice is data. These are journals that show stories of their pain, their growth, their resilience, and educators must move in a lens of awareness, move awareness into action so we can implement strategies that really affirm and create identity and access. And then finally, my contact information.